and welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Dean Obidala, and today we're joined by Seth Abramson, a lawyer, a professor at University of New Hampshire, and he's got a great new book, must-read book, Proof of Collusion, How Trump Betrayed America. Seth, welcome to Salon Talks.
Hi, Dean. Thank you for having me.
So, Seth, before we talk about your book, which is a must-read for many reasons, we'll go through it. You know, we're just in the last few days, we heard that Paul Whelan, a 48-year-old former Marine, is now reportedly been formally charged with espionage by the Russians. And it's curious to me that this comes only weeks after 30-year-old Maria Butina, the Russian spy who pled guilty to trying to influence our elections, actually did plead guilty. And now there's rumors, not even rumors, reports that the lawyer of Paul Whelan in Russia is saying, well, we're open to swap Butina and Whelan. What do you make of this?
So based upon the current status of Maria Butina's case in the federal system in the United States, we should assume that federal prosecutors, and again, it's not federal prosecutors with Mueller's team, but other federal prosecutors, have gotten all the information from Maria Butina about what she was up to in 2013, 2014, 2015 with her alleged handler, Alexander Torshin, that they're going to get. And therefore, a swap of Butina for Whelan doesn't make a lot of sense for the Kremlin in terms of keeping United States prosecutors from accessing the information they got from Butina. So I don't think that would be the reason. But they might want to swap because it would make Butina unavailable as a witness in any further proceedings. But it's for that very reason that I suspect federal prosecutors would never agree to any such swap. They don't just want the information from Butina, they also want her to be available as a witness.
And it's interesting, and that very point you made makes me feel that Donald Trump would love to see her swapped. Not that she's so far implicating him in any kind of conspiracy with the Russian, but clearly her involvement with the National Rifle Association, other leading Republicans. She set up dinners for them, friendly events where Russians were brought there to meet Republican officials. I would imagine Trump would love to see her swapped, and that's sort of my concern here.
I think there would be a political firestorm, the likes of which we have not seen yet, if Donald Trump somehow overruled federal prosecutors to ship Maria Butina back to Moscow, given, as you said, Dean, that her case isn't just about what she was doing in the United States in terms of spying with the assistance of Alexander Torshin. It's also about her contact with top officials at the NRA and also the channel that she and Paul Erickson created through the NRA to top officials in the Republican Party. So if you have the leader of the Republican Party sending her back to Moscow, making her unavailable as a witness, I think that would be a political controversy even bigger than anything we've already seen so far.
It's interesting the Butina case didn't get as much press as maybe it deserved, but there was one quote from the prosecutors involved saying that Butina's case is a vivid, quote, part of a larger mosaic of Russian influence operations in our country, and specifically referring to the 2016 election. So it's not just online media being attacked. It's really, they were sending people here to do things, clearly. And everything I've seen from intelligence agencies, and tell me if I'm wrong, was to help Donald Trump win the election.
That's right. I mean, it's not just that Maria Butina at Freedom Fest in July 2015 asked Donald Trump about his view of sanctions on Russia, giving him the first public opportunity to say that he opposed sanctions. It's not just that she was having high-level contact with NRA officials or that her boyfriend said he had a back channel between the Kremlin and top Republican Party officials. There are even aspects of the Butina case that we haven't talked much about. For instance, in the fall, just about 60 to 90 days before the 2016 election, in the fall of 2016, Maria Butina starts making contact with J.D. Gordon, who is the number 2 person on Donald Trump's National Security Advisory Committee at that point. And apparently, this will seem humorous, but they went to a Styx concert together, or they were scheduled to go to a Styx concert together. And so I think there's more even about what Butina was doing during 2016 that we don't know about yet. So her value is significant to federal prosecutors.
Full disclosure, I went to a Styx concert a long, long time ago when they were doing the, I think, Grand Illusion tour. It was actually a great show. I'm not sure how it would be now. So let's talk about your book, Proof of Collusion, How Trump Betrayed America. And I think what's so important about your book, Seth, is that it paints the picture for people that Donald Trump's involvement with Russia long predates this election, because if someone just sat back and go, why would Russia want to help Donald Trump out of the blue? They're not getting the full picture. You paint a great detailed analysis of how Trump cultivated them, and they seem to be cultivating Donald Trump. So tell us the beginning. When did Donald Trump first begin being cultivated and cultivating the Russians to help him?
So you're exactly right, Dean. What Proof of Collusion is it's a compilation of hundreds of major media investigative reports from reliable news outlets going back decades. And that compilation and curation and also I guess I would say synthesis of all those reports, hundreds of them. There are 1,600 plus citations in the book, create this narrative. Now, the answer to your question as to when does that narrative begin, at least in the book, and I think also in reality, the narrative begins in 1987 when Donald Trump makes a trip to Moscow in order to look for possible locations for a Trump Tower in Moscow, or even possibly multiple towers in Moscow, because that was a city he was very interested in developing in. And he comes back from Moscow for the first time in his life, apparently politicized. And he takes out an entire full-page article in a major newspaper, essentially taking political positions on the questions of the day. And so he also released The Art of the Deal in 1987, but many people see those two events, the release of his book, The Art of the Deal, but also his trip to Moscow, as the beginning of his political ambitions.
And in your book, there's a lot of big events. There was a small event that intrigued me, and tell me if it's significant or not. In 2006, Ivanka Trump goes to the Kremlin, gets a very special VVVIP tour by an important person into certain, I would say, very closed areas that the public cannot go to. Tell us about that meeting. Tell me if it's significant in your view and your analysis.
Well, it is significant, and it's significant for this reason. The man who gave Ivanka Trump the tour of the Kremlin, who led her into Vladimir Putin's personal office, who allowed her to sit in Vladimir Putin's chair, was a man by the name of Felix Sater, who ran a company called Bayrock. He ran it with Tavrik Avrif, another man who was the co-owner of Bayrock. And starting in 2002, Felix Sater was essentially Donald Trump's chief liaison to the entire Russian real estate market. And Ivanka made that trip to Moscow in 2006 as part of these repeated attempts by Felix Sater to get Donald Trump high-level connections in Moscow so that he could do real estate deals. There's an expert, as you know, Dean, who's quoted in Proof of Collusion as saying that anyone who can give someone a tour of the Kremlin, get them into Vladimir Putin's personal office, and get them into, even more than that, Vladimir Putin's chair, and take a picture of them sitting in that chair, is someone who is personally trusted by Vladimir Putin himself. What that suggests is that Donald Trump's contacts to high-level figures in the Kremlin, including Vladimir Putin, go back to 2002, 2003. We're talking 15 years here.
And with Donald Trump, the money's everything. You follow the money. You make a compelling point about Donald Trump financially, very difficult time getting access to capital here in the United States, late 1990s, early 2000s. Now, it's your view he turned to Russia. What did you find out in your own research here?
Well, so one of the things that you learn when you look at Donald Trump's history as a businessman, besides the fact that he had a slew of bankruptcies, is that he ran into a situation in the 1990s where American banks stopped lending to him altogether because of what they referred to as the Trump tax. The Trump tax is that when you lend Donald Trump a dollar, you get pennies back on the dollar for that loan. And as a result, across the board, he couldn't get loans from American banks, which for someone in American real estate would normally mean the end of your career entirely. So he had to go to overseas banks. We know that Deutsche Bank, for instance, is one of the banks that he went to. But we also know from an interview that Eric Trump gave to Golf Magazine in 2014 that he went to Russian banks to get that money. According to Eric Trump, and this is Donald Trump's own son, the golf courses that are run by the Trump Organization are entirely financed, according to Eric Trump, by Russian banks. That would, of course, mean hundreds of millions of dollars, if not much more than that, in loans between Donald Trump and a Kremlin-owned bank. But we also see this throughout his career in terms of Trump Tower Toronto, which was financed by a Russian bank, that Donald Trump has to go overseas, and he specifically goes to Russia starting in the 1990s.
And if we were able to get Donald Trump's tax returns, his corporate tax returns or his personal ones, is it likely we would see actual proof there that Russian banks were financing Donald Trump's operations?
It's entirely possible. And that is why, if you ask criminal investigators, and I was a criminal investigator for a period of time, what the first piece of information they would want in this case is to find out whether Donald Trump had suspect connections to the Russian government, is you'd want his tax returns. And therefore, there's a speculation that that would be the first thing that Robert Mueller would have accessed. So for instance, if Eric Trump was correct in 2014, if he was telling the truth, and it was certainly a statement against interest, so as a lawyer, I would expect he was telling the truth, that the Trumps were getting a lot of their money from Russian banks. If it's true, as Donald Trump Jr. said in 2008 in Manhattan, that a disproportionate percentage of Trump Organization clients are Russians, usually meaning Russian oligarchs, because you have to have a lot of money to deal with Trump properties, then that's something that we would expect to find in the tax returns. And that's why we do need to get them, and why Congress, frankly, should get them as soon as possible.
And that brings me to my next question. Democrats have just taken over the House, and Richard Neal, Congressman from Massachusetts, is the incoming Ways and Means chair, and he has the legal right to ask the Department of Treasury for Donald Trump's tax returns. Well, he just said that I don't want to rush it. I don't want to make it look partisan. We're going to take some time, maybe a month or so, to request it. What's your reaction to that?
So first, let's note, I know a lot of your listeners will know that there's a 40-year history of presidential candidates releasing their tax returns. Donald Trump said that he would do that, and he reneged on his promise. Furthermore, Donald Trump said that he would divest himself from all of the connections he had, business connections, loans, and so on, other associations through business, resulting in or related to the Trump organization, and he reneged on that promise as well. So that's a second problem. And then the third problem is we have all these quotes from his own children saying that there are these business connections that would clearly be relevant to the Mueller investigation. So for those three reasons, the tax returns are necessary. Now, my concern is that because Donald Trump will certainly fight any attempt to get his tax returns, it's clear that he withheld them from American voters and now from the American people, not because he was under audit, but because he doesn't like what they might display to the American people. Therefore, he is going to fight any attempt to get them. Therefore, Congress must begin the effort to get the tax returns now. We can't wait many months and then have the battle go on for many months, and suddenly it's 2020 and voters are voting in Republican primaries, or Republican candidates are deciding whether or not to challenge the president for the Republican primary. And we still don't have this information, which is so crucial. And again, I emphasize the number one piece of information an investigator would want to determine whether Donald Trump has suspect connections to the Russian government.
I couldn't agree with you more, because Trump is going to fight the release of his tax returns. We're going to see a litigation of that. I wish the Democrats, okay, you can wait till Monday, let's say, after being sworn in, but no longer, because they're not going to get it immediately. And you make a great point. It's not partisan. It's been a bipartisan almost commitment by Democratic and Republican presidential candidates to show your tax returns. It's part of transparency, which Donald Trump hates transparency like, a vampire hates holy water. I mean, the same idea. He does not want to be transparent. So I want to talk about another section of your book, which I think is so important. And I think ultimately in this investigation might turn out to be a pivotal piece of evidence. In June 2016, Donald Trump Jr., everyone remembers, gets emails from his friend in Russia, a music publisher, that the Argaloff family wants to help him. And they have dirt on Hillary Clinton. Everyone knows that leads to the famous Trump Tower meeting. What I think is important to give people context, that it's not out of the blue that this wealthy Russian family wants to help them. They have a long connection with Donald Trump. So can you share, as you did in your book, the connection between Trump and the Agaloffs?
Yeah, so Aras Agalarov is the Kremlin's chief real estate builder. And Donald Trump was in a business relationship with the Agalarovs, Aras and his son Amin, beginning in November of 2013. So when that meeting is set up in June of 2016, it's not about Natalia Veselnitskaya. She was there, and she was an agent of the party who's really important, which is Aras Agalarov, someone who Donald Trump was in a business relationship with. But the other thing I think people have to understand, Dean, is that it's not just illegal to receive a foreign campaign donation. It's illegal to solicit a foreign campaign donation. When Rob Goldstone contacted Donald Trump Jr. and said, here's the information that we have on Hillary Clinton. We have official documents. Number one, the way in which those documents were described would lead any reasonable person to believe that they had been acquired in an illicit way, number one. Number two, Rob Goldstone was making very clear that even if those documents had been compiled and gathered in a legal way, they had substantial in-kind value for the Trump campaign. And what did Trump Jr. do? He solicited and essentially accepted. I think you could go further and say he accepted that he wanted to receive that information. Whether or not he ultimately received it at that June meeting in 2016 doesn't change the fact that he solicited it, knowing what it was, from an agent of the Kremlin, which Aras Agalarov was, and Rob Goldstone was an agent of Aras Agalarov.
Now, Donald Trump, the father, has denied knowing about this meeting until a year later till the New York Times broke the emails. Based on your own research and understanding of Donald Trump, do you have any doubt Donald Trump Jr. conveyed that, hey, the Russians want to help you with this campaign before that meeting or around the time of that meeting?
Not only do I not have any doubt, I'm sure that Robert Mueller has no doubt. One of the things that you do as an investigator is you don't just look at a denial made by the suspect, in this case, Donald Trump Jr. What you do is you look at the context. So, for instance, you look at the context of Donald Trump Jr.'s relationship with Donald Trump. Was he someone who told his father everything based upon what we know from public reporting? Yes, anything important, any piece of information Donald Trump Jr. had that was important, he gave to Donald Trump. Did Donald Trump micromanage his campaign? Yes, we know that from public reporting. Did Donald Trump consider any contact with the Russians to be of utmost importance? I'll also add of utmost secrecy during the presidential campaign. Yes. But even beyond that, we have specific facts about what occurred around that time in early June 2016 that tell us that there was contact. Donald Trump Jr., when he testified before Congress, talked about there being a blocked phone call that came into him right after he heard from Rob Goldstone. So we know that Donald Trump Jr. had contact with someone who calls from a blocked number. And Congress asked Donald Trump Jr. directly, do you speak with your father on a regular basis? Donald Trump Jr. said yes. Do you speak with him every day? Donald Trump Jr. said yes. Does he call from a blocked number when he calls you every day, your own father? And Donald Trump Jr. said, I don't know whether he calls from a blocked number. I don't think any American is going to believe that that's true, that you get a call from your own parent every single day and don't know if they come up on your phone as a blocked number. So that's very strong circumstantial evidence, but there is much more circumstantial and even some direct evidence that Donald Trump had knowledge of this meeting beforehand, during, and after, and all the contours involved.
It's remarkable the ties that we keep learning that have been revealed to us after the campaign. Donald Trump denied having any deals with the Russians during the campaign. Then we find out an actual signed memorandum of understanding from October 2015, which was not like a one-page letter. It was a 17-page letter of understanding, which even dealt with parking and dealt with a health spa and how many units in this Trump Tower in Moscow were going to have residential units versus hotel units. So when you know all that, because Trump knew all that, when you know that Trump knew about this meeting, and then the very next month, in July 2016, Donald Trump looks into the camera and says, Russia, if you're listening, you'll be mightily rewarded if you get the emails of Hillary Clinton. What was Donald Trump saying there, knowing now what we know?
Well, you can go even further back than June 2016. George Papadopoulos has been very cagey about whether he told anyone on the campaign what Joseph Mifsud, a Kremlin agent, told him, which is that the Kremlin had stolen Hillary Clinton's emails. George Papadopoulos has said, I don't know if I told anyone. But there's a top aide for Donald Trump, and his last name is Mashburn, and he testified before Congress, and he said that he recalls George Papadopoulos telling the campaign in the spring of 2016 that the Kremlin had Hillary Clinton's stolen emails. That's well before even Donald Trump Jr. is told by email by Rob Goldstone that the Kremlin has done this. Moreover, there's a whole chapter in Proof of Collusion called The Hunt for Her Emails that establishes that right around the time that both Mashburn and Goldstone are communicating this information to the campaign about the stolen emails, you see all sorts of top Trump campaign advisors springing into action secretly, trying to reach out in many different ways, including on the dark web, to get in touch with Russian hackers to find Hillary's emails. All of this happens well before July 27th of 2016, when during a Florida press conference, Donald Trump says, Russia, if you're listening. So he knew at that time that the Kremlin had Hillary Clinton's emails. He knew that they'd been stolen. And also, Dean, as you probably know, within 24 hours of Donald Trump making that public call for Russian hackers to attack the United States, in fact, there was a cyber attack seeking to get exactly the information that Donald Trump had requested. And Donald Trump, let's emphasize, said in that press conference, this would be valuable information. That means he was soliciting, again, a valuable in-kind campaign donation from foreign services, and furthermore, doing so knowing that it would require or had required crimes for them to access and give that information to the Trump campaign and to the media and anyone else in the United States.
Your book, Proof of Collusion, truly connects the dots. It's remarkable in bringing it all together in the way you do right here as well. What do you say when Rudy Giuliani goes on national TV and says, Mueller, if you put up or shut up, you've got nothing, this is all BS? What's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, Rudy Giuliani, of course, is Donald Trump's defense attorney. I was a defense attorney for many years. Perhaps the only thing that Rudy Giuliani has said in the last couple years that I've agreed with is that at least as to Donald Trump himself, not as to anyone else surrounding Donald Trump, but as to Donald Trump himself, because he can't be tried for any crime while he's a sitting president, Rudy Giuliani pointed out that for Donald Trump, the Trump-Russia investigation really for now is a political question, whether or not he will be impeached. And Rudy Giuliani, to his credit, came out and transparently said, that's how I'm going to play this as a defense attorney. I'm not going to argue the law. I'm not going to argue the facts. I'm going to use rhetoric to talk politics. So every statement Americans hear from Rudy Giuliani, they should treat as not a legal argument, not a factual argument, not an evidentiary argument, not even the way a defense attorney would normally represent someone in a case. This is the one person in the country who can't be tried for a crime until a political process has been undergone. And for that reason, this is the one course of defense litigation in the country where someone is going to use political rhetoric to defend their client rather than the law. So that's how I take every single statement from Rudy Giuliani. It's purely politics.
And that's great framing. And I will say that I think there's a question if the New York Attorney General or a state prosecutor can file a charge against Donald Trump, but I know it'll be litigated. It's an open question. Can you actually prosecute a sitting president? And we could talk all day about DOJ regulations, internal memos, but before we wrap up, I'm just going to ask you about some of the key players and give us your prediction based on all your reporting, your research, and your knowledge about how do you think this ends up for each of them. Donald Trump Jr.
Donald Trump Jr. has said that he expects to be indicted for making false statements. I agree with him. I think that there are other charges. We've talked about some, including solicitation of illegal campaign donations that he could be charged with. But I think at a minimum, he is correct. He will be charged with making false statements. He'll be indicted.
Jared Kushner.
Jared Kushner, as people who read Proof of Collusion will see, is one of the final targets of the Mueller investigation, assuming he has not been secretly cooperating this whole time, though there's no reason to think that he has been. He is one of the bad actors here. There's a lot of things that he was involved with in addition to Trump-Russia collusion that are talked about in the book. Jared Kushner, in fact, was behind collusion pre-election between the Trump campaign and other governments besides Russia. If people want to know more about that, they can find it in Proof of Collusion.
Ivanka Trump.
Ivanka Trump is Donald Trump's closest advisor. She was apprised at all points of his real estate deals, including the 2015 Trump-Rosoff deal that Trump was hiding from the American people. She's been involved in all of his major real estate projects, as we saw going back to 2006. She hasn't been talked about much. I'm not sure why that is. If you're an investigator and you're Robert Mueller, you would suspect her to be part of any conspiracy to collude with the Russians if that occurred. And so I think we'll be hearing a lot more about her as the months go on.
The dream target, Mike Pence.
So the top question I get from people is whether Mike Pence will be implicated in the Mueller investigation. So far, the evidence that I turned up from reading hundreds of major media articles going back for 2 years and beyond is that Mike Pence may well have lied to the public about what he knew and when he knew it, but it is not clear that he knew about Mike Flynn's illicit and illegal negotiations with the Russians in December 2016 as they were happening. Mike Pence really made an effort as soon as he joined the Trump campaign to remain as aloof as possible from everything that was going on involving Russia. I think he saw that after a career which basically was dead in the water when he was brought on as the VP candidate, his one chance to continue his career was frankly to become president if Donald Trump were to be removed from office. And I think he's proceeded accordingly, so I'm not sure that he will be implicated.
And of course, the last one, the godfather of the crime family, Donald Trump. Donald J. Trump, how do you think this ends up with him?
Realistically, at some point in 2019, when the Mueller report is released, there'll be a court battle before it's released. We should expect that impeachment proceedings will begin against Donald Trump at some point during 2019. The question will be, because of course the Democrats control the House, we expect impeachment would pass once we have all the evidence that Robert Mueller has, which is much more than even what's in Proof of Collusion. The question would be whether 67 senators would vote to convict. If it's looking like that's going to happen, there's a lot of speculation that Donald Trump would attempt to negotiate his resignation in exchange for some sort of immunity from prosecution for him and his children. That would be an unprecedented maneuver by federal prosecutors, so I don't even know if that's possible. But I do think if Donald Trump thought he was going to be convicted in the Senate, his lawyers would move to begin that sort of negotiation about resignation.
And the very last thing, Seth, what would you recommend the House Democrats do now that they're in control of all the committees and they have all subpoena power?
Well, I think that's the key, is that there are so many subpoenas that weren't issued, so many witnesses who weren't spoken to, so many witnesses who, when they were called, weren't put under oath, weren't put in public. Now that the Democrats run the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the committees that really will be taking the forefront along with Ways and Means, on this investigation, they need to issue those subpoenas. They need to bring the witnesses in who should have been called, and there are dozens of them, and they need to have them testify in public. I do think, I'll just end with this, Dean, that the most important meeting that we're not talking about yet was reported by the New York Times on May 19th of 2018, and that's an August 3rd, 2016 meeting between Donald Trump Eric Prince, who was a shadow national security advisor for Donald Trump, George Nader, who was an emissary for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates at that point, and Joel Zamel, who was connected to the Israeli government as an Israeli business intelligence expert himself, and also connected to two of the top Russian oligarchs who are tied to both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And the New York Times says that on behalf of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Russia, pre-election collusion, illegal pre-election collusion was offered to Donald Trump Jr. at that meeting, and he said yes. I think that August 3rd, 2016 meeting is much more important than the June 2016 meeting that we focused on so much. So Democrats need to get to the truth and what happened in Trump Tower, and it was in Trump Tower on August 3rd, 2016.
Thank you very much, Seth. And I can't recommend your book, Proof of Collusion, more for people who want to learn the true facts and get the full picture of Donald Trump's decades-long relationship with Russia, where he cultivated them and they cultivated him. So, Seth, nice chatting with you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Dean.